It's a beautiful Monday here in Lagos. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the program. We're celebrating all of the gentlemen and wonderful women who have sacrificed, who have paid the supreme sacrifice for Nigeria, in protecting the sovereignty of our country, and every veteran as well as the soldiers, fighting for us. It's Armed Forces Remembrance Day, and we'll keep them close to our heart. Now, the Supreme Court on Friday affirmed the elections of 8 state governors, including the governors of Plateau, Kano, and Zamfara, who were sacked by the Court of Appeal last year. Others are Governor Francis Nwufuru of Ebonyi State, Governor Bala Mohammed of Bauchi, Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos, Alex Oti of Abia, and Governor Basi Otu of Cross River State. A five-man member panel of the Supreme Court, led by Justice Inyang Okoro, in a unanimous judgment, set aside the decisions of Court of Appeal, Abuja Division, in the appeals challenging the election of Plateau State Governor Caleb Muftwang. Presiding Justice Inyang Okoro said that a lot of people have now suffered the decision of the lower court. I recall that 2 senators and 4 members of House of Representatives, as well as about 16 members of the Plateau State House of Assembly, were removed from office by the Court of Appeal on the account of same facts and issues on which the Apex Court restored Governor Muftwang to office. The judgments of the Supreme Court on Friday, which overturned the verdicts of the Court of Appeal on the governorship election petition cases in Plateau, Kano, and Zamfara states, have now sparked a crisis of confidence in the appellate court. We have more in this report.
This was the situation on the street of Kano immediately after the Supreme Court judgment in Abuja. Earlier, Justice John Okoro, who read the lead judgment, said the Court of Appeal was wrong in affirming the decision of the tribunal, which held that Mr. Yusuf did not win the majority of the lawful votes cast in the governorship election on the 18th of March 2023. In the judgment, Justice Okoro held that the tribunal was wrong in deducting 165,616 votes accrued to Mr. Yusuf in the election on the grounds that the ballot papers were not signed and stamped by officials of INEC. Also, the Supreme Court affirmed Babajide Sanwo-Olu's election as governor of Lagos State. The court dismissed the appeal of Gbadebo Road Vival of the Labour Party against the election of Governor Sanwo-Olu. The Apex Court also affirmed the judgment of the Court of Appeal Lagos, dismissing the appeal for lacking in merit. Shortly after the judgment, this is what the former governor of Lagos State had to say.
When you have concurrent findings at the trial and appellate court, it's a rarity for the Supreme Court to depart from those conclusions. So, congratulations to our governor, congratulations to our party and to our government. And so, there will be no more distractions to governance now running at full pace.
Bala Mohammed of the People's Democratic Party has been affirmed as the governor of Bauchi State. The Apex Court affirmed the decision of the Court of Appeal and dismissed the appeal by Sadiq Abba of the All Progressives Congress for lacking in merit. The election of Francis Nwufuru of the All Progressives Congress as governor of Ebonyi State has been affirmed by the Supreme Court. The Apex Court affirmed the decision of the Court of Appeal Lagos, dismissing the appeal of Chukwuba Odi of the People's Democratic Party for lacking in merit.
And thank my legal team and the All Progressive Congress and the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Especially, let me thank the courts.
On the appeal by the governor of Plateau State, the Supreme Court reversed the sack of Caleb Muftwang, affirming him as governor. Just few minutes after the judgment, the street of Jos became lively again as residents jubilated freely, awaiting the return of the governor from Abuja. But this is what the governor said shortly after the judgment.
I want to thank their lordships who have today restored confidence in the judiciary Their lordships have demonstrated courage, and they have raised the hope of the ordinary man in Nigeria that justice is still available in Nigeria.
The Supreme Court also affirmed the election of Dauda Lawal of the People's Democratic Party as Zamfara governor. The Apex Court set aside the decision of the Court of Appeal Abuja, which declared the governorship election in Zamfara State as inconclusive and ordered a rerun in 3 local government areas of the state.
Zamfara people are happy and we're grateful. We will now go back, settle down, and do the needful in terms of governance.
With the judgments delivered today, it is believed that the governors will now focus on development and delivering good leadership in their respective states.
Reactions continue to trail the judgment of the Supreme Court last week Friday. You heard the Plateau State Governor saying this is restoration of faith in the judiciary. And of course, the APC is also accepting the decision of the Supreme Court, calling on the opposition to now come out openly to apologize for all of the things they've said about the Apex Court in the past. Very interesting development on the front pages of the papers this morning. There are also reactions. PDP, we hear on the front page of this day, PDP heads to NJC over appeal court verdict ousting Plateau lawmakers. And on the Nigerian Tribune, PDP APC set to clash in Plateau State. I'm wondering where that story came from, because we're hearing from the APC in Plateau also accepting the verdict of the court. And quite a number of reactions trailing what seems to be perhaps the biggest news from the judiciary, where the decision has now been made about the governorship appeal for 8 states. Supreme Court mammoth crowd welcomes Governor Yusuf in Kano. And just following that decision, the governor appointed former Governor Ganduje Kwankwaso, others into advisory council. And he's come up with this body of former leaders of the state to help advise the state government as to its policies and decisions going forward. Also on the front page of The Nation, Supreme Court verdicts APC didn't trade off Kano Plateau. It's purely a legal matter. Victorious governors hail Tinubu's non-interference. Let's begin with some feedback from across board. The phone lines are open to hear your thoughts as to how the judgment how the judgment went last week. George has called in from Ikeja. Good morning, Mr. George.
Good morning, Nifemi. I'm also concerned about some of the developments about that judgment. When I saw most of those governors in court on the day of judgment, it gave me the impression that they got a hint of what the judgment was going to be. But coming to the body of the judgment, up to now, I've not seen the copy to really study the details of what the judges were saying. I think at this rate, we need to tinker a little with the electoral law based on the Supreme Court affirmations on some of these agitations. Because it's becoming a norm in our electoral process that you must go to court, even when you know you don't have a case. A governor is not settled until the Supreme Court makes a pronouncement about whether he won the election. That is not a good trend for a democracy. In the case of Plateau State, for example, what will now happen to those legislators that the appeal court quashed their elections based on the same premise on which the governor has now been given victory? And their case cannot go beyond the appeal court. Who do they appeal to now? So the electoral process, the electoral law, that's why I'm saying we may have to tinker with the electoral law again. If it means doing away with the lower courts and the governors just going straight to the Supreme Court, instead of wasting time and money for senior advocates in Nigeria to, look at the time it has taken. Other cases in courts. These litigations about the electoral process took up about 8 months, and other cases are waiting in court. There are some cases that are in court for 15 years. So the judges will have room to do, to attend to other matters. So we need a clear-cut policy on electoral process that will not attract all these litigations. It's becoming a norm, and we have to do something about it. As for the final case, I wish that the government will lose the case. But my wishes are nothing before the Supreme Court judges. Not because he did not win the case, but because not because he did not win the election, rather, but because of what he was doing when he came to power. How do you just start demolishing the legacies of your predecessor?
But you also saw what he did after winning in Supreme Court. It seems the man has retraced his steps. He's now come up with a council.
Yes, I saw it, but I hope it is genuine.
All right.
You will never do such a thing again, and other governors would learn lessons from his case.
Thank you, Mr. Judge.
Of Kano.
Yes, for your contribution. That's about it. I also shared your initial sentiment about the governors in court, but I saw a picture of the APC candidate as well in court, so it's hard to tell whether their presence, speaks to the fact that perhaps they had an idea of the way those judgments went on Friday. But I'm joined live from our Abuja studio by a legal practitioner and former presidential aide, is also an APC chieftain, Chief Okoye Obona Obla. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning.
Glad to have you join us. So your party, the APC, has hailed the judgment of the Supreme Court on the governorship election petitions and now asking that opposition must apologize to the judiciary for previous comments made on the Apex Court. What's your opinion on what played out on Friday?
Not only to the judiciary, also the executive branch of government, particularly President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. A lot of aspersions were cast, on the president for alleged interference with the judicial branch of government. But we have seen that the president is a Democrat to the core, and you know that he's one of those who fought for enthronement of democracy in Nigeria as far back as the 1990s. And also, when he was governor of Lagos State, he demonstrated that he's a federalist, he's a constitutionalist, and he believed totally in the rule of law. And he went to court to challenge the federal government over withholding of local government grants to Lagos State, Lagos State. So he didn't interfere. The APC too, APC is premised on the rule of law. The philosophical doctrine of APC is one who will restore the rule of law in Nigeria. And since 2015, we have seen a gross reduction in electoral roguery in Nigeria. And that is what has been demonstrated in the courts, that INEC indeed conducted the last general election very well. And I think I agree with the last speaker that we must begin to look at our electoral jurisprudence. I find it very funny that a lot of resources and time is being wasted on needless litigation. For instance, I will give my state as an example. The governor of Lagos, Cross River State, Senator Basi Ededotu, was elected. We have 18 local government areas in Cross River State, and he won in 15 local government areas, overwhelmingly. But despite that, his opponent went to court on 3 grounds, but during the pendency of the petition at the election tribunal, the portion of the petition challenging the conduct of the election was, was expunged or at the application of the petitioner. But the other 2 grounds were on the qualification of the deputy governor and the governor. They said they claimed that the governor did not have educational qualification. The governor was a banker for so many years. He also was in the House of Reps for 8 years, and he was in the Senate. And then, if you listen to the governor is very articulate, he's very intelligent. So why would you begin to say that a man like that is not qualified to contest governorship election? The deputy governor, they claim that he has a British passport. But the Constitution, at Section 28, is very clear that, look, if you are a Nigerian citizen by birth, you can hold a foreign passport and you are still eligible to contest election. these things were very obvious, but they still wanted to litigate. You know,
I hear you, Chibobla, and that has been a situation, you know, in this climb where, you know, people seek to win elections, you know, in court rather than at the polling station. But you mentioned earlier, I'm concerned about the position of the APC. The APC may have welcomed the decision of the Supreme Court and see it as a way of, you know, upholding the integrity of the last election. But what about what happened at the Court of Appeal? Because we saw the Apex Court last week literally criticize some justices of the Appellate Court over the quality of the judgments in the governorship election petitions brought before them. What does this say about the administration of justice in Nigeria?
Well, what the Supreme Court did was not out of the way. The Supreme Court is a court of review, and they are entitled to criticize or critique the judgments of the courts below. If the Court of Appeal and maybe the Election Tribunal, they are entitled to do that. That is their work, to look at, the judgments of lower courts brought before it on appeal, to see if an error of law was committed, if an error of fact was committed. For instance, in the case of Kano State, the Supreme Court said the Court of Appeal committed error in evaluation of evidence concerning the ballot papers, the 165,663 ballot papers, which were later deducted from the votes scored by the Governor Abba Yusuf. That is exactly the role of the Supreme Court. There's nothing wrong with that. The Supreme Court can descend on on judges of the lower courts and criticize them. But it will also help maybe the National Judicial Council in the appointment of judges. They should really evaluate the quality of scholarship of the lawyers or the judges they are promoting from the High Court to the Court of Appeal.
These errors that have been identified, are very costly. You had Justice Enyango Koro, who headed the Supreme Court's 5-member panel, saying that his only worry is that a lot of people have suffered as a result of the Court of Appeal decision, which according to him was absolutely wrong. So apparently he was referring to members of the National and State House of Assembly who were sacked by the Appellate Court.
Yes, it's unfortunate. That's an injustice, but it has been done, and the Court of Appeal is the final court. So we have to accept it in good faith and move on. And then it will also help the National Assembly to amend the relevant provisions of the Electoral Act to ensure that that injustice doesn't happen again. But there's nothing we can do again. The period for elections litigation is over. Nobody can go to court and say, look, set aside this judgment because this judgment was made in error. There's no time for that because the election law, there are timelines for filing of petitions, timelines for hearing of appeals, and so forth and so on. So let's move on. I heard that the governor, the Speaker of Plateau State, saying that those legislators that were pronounced winner by the Court of Appeal are not recognized. That is a very, very contemptuous statement to make.
We are going to definitely get there, Chief Obla, and I understand the constitutionality, that says that the Court of Appeal is the last point of call on assembly election matters. But some have suggested some means of judicial remedy here. Some have advised the Plateau State government, for instance, to approach the Supreme Court to seek justice for the sacked lawyers. Others have asked that the affected lawmakers should demand a judicial review. Is this feasible?
I don't know how they are going to do that, because if you look at the Constitution, for state and National Assembly election litigation, the last bus stop is the Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court has no jurisdiction to hear appeals emanating from State Assembly and National Assembly litigation. So are they going to do that? They cannot look into the matter because they don't have jurisdiction. And it's also, I can relate that with the case of Kano, where the Supreme Court said, look, that the lower court, the tribunal, the Court of Appeal, do not have jurisdiction concerning whether or not the governor of Kano State was properly nominated by his political party. Also, they alluded to that in Plateau State case, governorship case, that look, the Court of Appeal do not have jurisdiction to adjudicate on the issue concerning the order that was made by a High Court of Plateau State, saying that PDP should conduct congresses in its ward and local governments and the state to nominate candidates that will fly PDP flag in the general election. So I don't see the Supreme Court assuming jurisdiction.
What about the possibility of the Court of Appeal reviewing its own decision?
Well, that is, the Court of Appeal can review its decision, but this, this is election litigation. Election litigation is different from ordinary civil proceedings. It is what we call sui generis. It is peculiar. So I don't know whether the Court of Appeal, if anybody brings an application for review, if the Court of Appeal has jurisdiction to review, any of its cases based on the fact that an error was made. It's not fraud. That issue is not fraud. It's not fraud. The court can only set aside a judgment when the judgment is procured by fraud in ordinary civil proceedings. But these are election litigations. There are timelines for hearing of appeals. There are timelines for filing of petition. So I don't know if the Court of Appeal can assume jurisdiction on the ground that an error was made by the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal cannot sit on appeal over. No, let me finish. Yes. The Court of Appeal has no jurisdiction to review its judgments. Because if you do that, you are asking the Court of Appeal to sit on appeal over its judgment. It's not done. Clearly, the Constitution provides that anybody who is aggrieved with the judgment of the Court of Appeal has to go to the Supreme Court.
All right, let us take a minute to attempt to identify what happened, because it may not be easy to tell those who voted for these individuals to move on, especially hearing from the Supreme Court and finding out that the way and manner they were asked to go, is shrouded in a lot of illegality. One of the justices mentioned that the Supreme Court has held in many cases that the sponsorship of a candidate for election is an internal affair of a political party, and that the Court of Appeal lacks the jurisdiction to determine the validity of party candidacy. So in the case of Plateau, Yewade of the APC, according to the Supreme Court, has no right to challenge the emergence of Governor Muftwang, as a ticket holder of the PDP. Is it that the Court of Appeal isn't aware of these many precedents at the Apex Court?
Well, I will say that judges are fallible. They are human beings. They are prone to making error of law or error of facts. And you saw how the Supreme Court in the Kano State corrected an error of facts, error that was made by the Court of Appeal while evaluating the evidence of the ballot papers. You also saw how the Supreme Court corrected the error that was made in the Plateau State governorship. It is normal for judges to make error. That is why we have the appellate court. That is why we have the Supreme Court. The Court of Appeal, when revealed judgments of the low high court, will look for errors, or the litigants will look for errors, highlight them, present them before the Court of Appeal. And the Court of Appeal, if it agrees with them, will also always set aside the judgment of the high court. Or when the matter is, the appeal emanates from the Court of Appeal, the litigant will highlight errors of facts or law committed by the Court of Appeal, and then the Supreme Court will look at them and then correct them by setting aside those errors. So it is normal in the judicial process for judges to make law and to make errors. We shouldn't castigate judges. That is how the system works. Nobody has a monopoly of knowledge. Sometimes you make an error of the head, and it's normal. And this thing works out well in the judicial process. You have three hierarchy, of course. You have the High Court, you have the Court of Appeal, you have the Supreme Court. You have the Election Tribunal, you have the Court of Appeal, as appellate election tribunal, and also you have the Supreme Court. So that is it. It is not bad. We shouldn't castigate judges. We should just take it as part of the development, evolution of Nigerian democracy and its electoral jurisprudence. But the only body that can correct all these errors is the National Assembly. I would think that the National Assembly should set up a committee, start studying all the judgments of the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, even the election tribunals, and begin to see the areas where the areas or portions or the sections of the Electoral Act and the Constitution that can be amended so that we have a seamless elections in the next 3 years.
When you say it is normal for judges to make such error, the question is, how weighty are these errors? In the case of the National Assembly, where the final, point of call is the Court of Appeal, and then the Supreme Court is now, finding out errors, such errors, on a matter of this nature. Will you agree then with some legal scholars who have described as judicial rascality the inability of Court of Appeal and other lower courts to follow previous Supreme Court decisions in this regard?
Well, I would not call this a judicial rascality. I will still maintain my position that anybody can commit error. And it is not only peculiar to Nigerian judiciary, in the American jurisprudence and judiciary. I have read cases where people in America are sentenced to prison for what they didn't do. Then after several years after serving their prison, terms, they will now come to realize that, the man did not commit anything. I also read a case that happened in 18th century America, in the military. A black American was set up, by the military. They didn't want him because he's the first black man to attempt the West Point military academic. So the white racists didn't want him, and they now brought up trump-up charges against him. He was court-martialed and sentenced, and he was stripped of his commission. And after over 100 years, they now went through the records and discovered that the court-martial, which is the court of law, made an error. So these things are normal. But I also quickly say that the National Judicial Council, when appointing judges, should also evaluate the judges very well to ensure that they know the law very well.
I hear you. If I can butt in quickly, because I like the example you have made about errors in other crimes. But what happens in those cases is the moment it is, established that someone was jailed in error, that person is let go. Someone said that the fate of the Plateau State lawmakers is similar to a situation where the law under which a person is convicted is subsequently pronounced unconstitutional. So not reinstating them is like saying such a person should remain in prison, even though you found out that they were imprisoned in error. Don't you agree?
Well, I would not agree with you because civil litigation is different from, other ordinary.
No, you gave that example. That was why I followed up with it.
Yes, but I give that example to highlight the point that judges do make errors, and if a judge makes an error, we shouldn't crucify him. It is just unfortunate that the framers of the Constitution made, the Court of Appeal the last bus stop for state and National Assembly elections. But even if you want to contest it, which law are you going to rely on? Because if you want to rely on the Constitution, there's no provision for that. If you want to rely on the Electoral Act, there is no provision for that. I am pained that they have suffered an injustice, or these members of the National Assembly or State Assembly that were removed have suffered an injustice. That is why I am saying that the National Assembly should look at the Electoral Act and take that case into consideration subsequently when they are amending the law to ensure that nobody suffered an injustice based on the error committed by a court or election tribunal, because there is no appeal from that court to the next court. So it calls for it calls for a sole session by the judiciary itself, and that is why I was saying that the National Judicial Council that is responsible for recommending lawyers or judges for appointment should always do evaluation to ensure that these judges or lawyers that are being considered for appointment to the higher bench have the scholarship, have the intellectual, ability or capacity. Yes, but right. you may also blame the lawyers. Who were the lawyers in that matter? Because
we're going to talk more about the NJC and soul searching, as well as the lawyers that you have raised just now. But that will be after this break.
Yes.
Stay with us, everyone.